Without further ado, today we're going to continue on ruthless elimination. So we started out the series talking about how we need to have a ruthless elimination. And then we talked about some practical things. So a couple weeks ago, we talked about our need for silence and solitude. Last week, Hannah talked about simplifying our stuff and our finances. How many of you guys still carry around that little card you got from last week? I keep pulling it out. It's so convenient. That's awesome. Did you see that, Hannah? I keep pulling it out. I got it right here. And I just read one every time. So I'm like halfway through the list now. So working on that. This week, we're going to talk about restlessness. And I want to start by telling you, when I was 20 years old, I was full-time in school, commuting about an hour to get to class. I was doing an internship with a nonprofit, and I was also interning with the church, and so I was just constantly busy. My life was like, a Tetris board on my calendar. I know some of you guys know what that's like, and it is so stressful. You go to bed thinking, what else did I need to do? I'm running behind. If there's any interruption, you just immediately freeze, and you're like, I don't know what to do. Like, my life is falling apart here. That was my life for a few years. When I was 20 years old, Hannah and I had just gotten married, and I'll tell you what, some of the things that I absolutely loved. I loved church. I loved going to class. I loved it so much. It was these ministry classes, Bible classes. I just so ate up. But because I was so busy, things that I loved became dreadful to me. So, of course, I loved Hannah, but I treated her like she was another task. I treated her horribly at that time. And I look back and I wonder, why was I like that? Like, I didn't have to say yes to everything. I didn't have to take as many classes as I did. And I remember thinking, back one of the drives home, I'd listen to a pastor preaching his sermons, and just something I did on the drive, and he would talk about like how much his church was growing, and sometimes he'd share his story of starting his church from scratch, and how much work it took and how much time he put into it. And I would do this sort of comparing myself to what he had to do. And I thought, okay, well, if he's working this hard, I have to work at least that hard, because I'm not counting on luck to build this great, amazing ministry and make my life really count. Oh, I'm pulling the Hannah. Can you hear my heart? You can. Let me adjust this for a second, or that might be too much. Hello? There we go. I think that's a little better. A little better here. There we go. Okay. So I remember listening to these sermons, and I remember comparing myself with this other pastor. And, a couple years ago, there's a podcast that came out about this particular pastor. The whole Christian world was obsessed with the story of how it was called The Rise and Fall of Mars Hill. And it became the #1 podcast in Christianity because people wanted to know about this guy, how he started his church, and why he left the church. And it was a story of how he was a bully. He was terrible to people. He was huge head, manipulating everybody around him, things like that. He'd lie. He plagiarized, all this stuff. Eventually, the church was going to correct him, and before they had the chance to try to work out some of the things he had to work on, he said, God's called me somewhere else, and he left, and basically disgraced, and I think that was my role model. That was what I saw as, this was the epitome of godliness. Like, to me, I thought that if I was going to be pleasing to God, it would include restlessness. To me, if I wasn't exhausted, I wasn't working hard enough for God. And I got it completely backwards. Do you know that the healthy spiritual life, a life that pleases God, is a life of rest, not a life of restlessness? I want to ask you, is your life restful or restless? We've got a chart up here, a little list of both sides here, and I want to go through these. Think about it. Do you have more margin or more busyness? Would you characterize your life by being slow or hurried? Quiet or noise? Deep relationships or crowds? Enjoyment or envy? I like this. Clarity or chaos? I skip. Delight or distraction? Gratitude or greed? Working from love or working for love? Do you know the difference? Working as contribution or as accomplishment? Like you only feel good if you're recognized or if you know you did right versus you love what you do. I would still be, 10 years later, a lot more on the right side than I'd want to be. Today we want to talk about how do we get more to the left side here, little by little, taking steps toward the left. Left side is the life God's called you to. A less hurried, a restful life. Now, if you remember a couple of weeks ago, we talked about the problem with, can we just add more time to our lives? If we just had more time, that is the myth we live with, right? A few years ago, Tim Ferriss wrote a book called The 4-Hour Work Week. And in it, he said that if you do these steps, you could work only 4 hours a week. And on the cover, it was this picture of an island with a palm tree. And that was like bliss. And so maybe our problem is that we do need more time, and we need to be able to work a lot less. And his strategy was, why don't we outsource all of the jobs and all of the work to India and have them do all of our work for us, was his solution. Maybe not exactly what God would call you to, but that was his solution. This is how we find a restful life. He said in the subtitle, escape the 9 to 5 and join the new rich. He described the new rich not as having lots of things, but having lots of freedom. And it was kind of compelling, except we know that for one, we do not live a godly life by taking advantage of other people. For two, we need more than time, because you spend 3 hours at the beach and you're still restless, you're just going to be bored. You're not going to experience the rest that God has called you to. So why are we not experiencing rest? One of the reasons might have to do with time, but I'd say a deeper reason has to do with this idea of satisfaction. How many of you guys know the one-word slogan to the candy bar, Snickers? I think it's a question. Are you what? Satisfied. So I've got a bowl full of Snickers here, and I've got a question for you. If I were to open up this one candy bar, and let's just imagine I ate it, what do you believe would happen? You came up with that. Let's test that theory. Yeah, I'm going to want another one. I am. You're right. Give Marie a hand. She gets it right away. And in fact, why don't we pass these out? You can take it home with you. Thank you, Hannah. I did not think ahead. The bowl. Yeah, take a Snickers with you. There may be enough. Grab one to eat, and then one to keep forever as a reminder that we need to be satisfied. Why are we not satisfied? Well, according to John Mark Comer, he believes the reason we're not satisfied is because we are constantly living with the need for more. Philosophers have talked about what would it take to be satisfied, to be totally content with what we have, and it would mean more and more and more. We would need something eternal, especially in this day and age where we are hit up with, why don't you make a guess, how many ads the average person sees in a day? Any guesses? More. They range between, some say 4,000 and some say as many as 10,000 ads we are exposed to. 10,000 times. At least 4,000 times we're told, eat this, drink this, watch this, do this, be this, over and over and over and over again. We're told, you are not enough. You are not content unless you buy this thing, unless you consume this product. Over and over again, we are trained not to be satisfied. No matter what Snickers says, we're never going to be satisfied unless we can be satisfied with who? You're at church. What do you think I'm going to go here? Take a look at the screen. St. Augustine said it like this. He says, you have made us for yourself. This is a prayer. And our heart is restless until it rests in you. Our heart is restless not until we get a good vacation. It's until we figure out how do we rest in God's presence. Another author said this. He was pretty bleak about the situation. He says, we just do not know how to sit with God anymore. We have become perhaps the most emotionally exhausted, psychologically overworked, spiritually malnourished people in history. We don't know how to sit with God anymore, and it's ruining us. Luckily, Jesus has a solution. One day, Jesus was walking around with his disciples, and it just so happened to be what we call the Sabbath day, where they were supposed to rest. And on the Sabbath, they were munchy. And I've never done this myself, but apparently you can pick grain just straight off from the field, and that could be tasty. I don't really buy it, but if I'm hungry enough, maybe I'd do it. And so they're munching on this grain. Religious leaders complain. They say, it's the Sabbath. What are you doing? We caught you. And Jesus replies and says, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. Jesus was defending his disciples and saying that the Sabbath was not meant to be a burden. So this was a command that the Jewish people had been trying to follow for years and years, and it became more of a weight on them. And Jesus said, this is designed to be a gift. Now today we have the opposite problem. We're not too legalistic about the Sabbath. Today we ignore it as if it doesn't matter, and we forget what Jesus said. He said the Sabbath was made for man and woman. You're not off the hook, women. You get the Sabbath too, that God is offering us a Sabbath. So let's talk about what a Sabbath is. A Sabbath is more than just time off. It is time off to be with God. It is our chance to practice what it looks like to sit quietly with God, to find rest in Him. Now, where do we get the Sabbath? Well, we go all the way to the beginning. In the very beginning, God creates everything. 6 days He's making light and darkness, and He's separating the waters, and He's doing all this crazy stuff. On the seventh day, we're told that God rested. He rested on the seventh day. And then we get this. So God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, because on it God rested from all His work that He had done in creation. So this was on which day? Seventh. Good, you're paying attention. He blessed it. What does it mean to bless a day? I always found that so confusing. That is weird. We don't bless a day. What, did the day sneeze or something? He blesses the Sabbath. He blesses the seventh day. Well, in this narrative, He blesses two other things. He blesses humanity, and He blesses the animals. And after blessing them, He says, be fruitful and multiply. So maybe by blessing the seventh day, He's saying that through this particular day, this day can bring forth life. Just like humans and animals can multiply. This day can multiply
life. And you think, okay, well, what does that look like? Well, they did this study, and they saw that the happiest people on earth are Seventh-day Adventists. They're a sect of Christianity that focus on the Sabbath a whole lot, and they're known as being the happiest on earth. But they went even further, and they showed that not only are they the happiest, but they tend to live about 10 years longer than the average person. Think about it this way. If our age expectancy is 70 years, and 1 in every 7 days you practice Sabbath, that means for every day they practice Sabbath, they're given another day to their life. So really, the Sabbath, the seventh day, was blessed by God. And then it actually gave not just a quality of life, but a quantity of life to people. Pretty remarkable. And then he makes it holy. What does he mean by holy? We saw that he blessed the seventh day, but then he makes it holy. Well, when we talk about things being holy, we're talking about places or things, like the holy temple. And that is a place so defined by God that this is where you go to find God. You go to the temple, the holy temple. Now he's saying it's not a space, but it's a time. That's where you go to find God, is on the seventh day. This is how God created the universe to work. And what ends up happening is if we go against the grain of the universe, we get splinters. We have to work with the grain of the universe. In fact, during the French Revolution, they said, let's just do a 10-hour work day. And during that time, things did not get better, they got worse. There was an explosion of suicides during that time, and the economy crashed, partially due to a 10-day work week. It didn't work. In fact, they've done studies to say it just does not work, to work and work and work ourselves to the ground. There is the law of diminishing return. If you try to work more hours, once you get past 40 hours in your week, your productivity starts to decrease per hour. What they've seen is that if you work 55 hours in the week, you're going to accomplish basically the same amount as if you work 70 hours in a week. We were not designed to work that long. We were designed to take a break, to take a day off. In fact, not only were we designed to have a Sabbath, we were commanded to. Ain't that weird that God commands us in the 10 Commandments? It makes one of the top 10 of God's list to keep the Sabbath. Think about that. This is a gift. Take a day off is a command. It's like God commanding you to eat your ice cream. Eat it. Like what a gift. If you look at the 10 Commandments, it's remarkable that Sabbath makes it. I mean, do you know what's in the 10 Commandments? Do not murder. Do not commit adultery. Take a day off, for crying out loud. Maybe if you don't take a day off, or if you do, you'll be less likely to do some other things. And so we're commanded to take that day off. We're commanded to keep the Sabbath. And so right in front of you, you got Exodus and Deuteronomy. The difference between Exodus and Deuteronomy are 40 years. So two different generations. One generation hears the 10 Commandments and the Sabbath. Another generation, their children basically, 40 years later, they hear it again with some differences. So here's some of the differences. In Exodus it says, remember the Sabbath, okay? Remember it. Don't forget. Remember that you're not God, and the universe will continue to hold together without you working. Remember that. Remember, life is a gift. Remember that. But in Deuteronomy, to their kids, he says, observe the Sabbath. So maybe that's a little more of a you observe a holiday, you plan for it, you prepare, get ready for the Sabbath. Make it happen. Make it special. And then I got an ellipsis because it goes on for a while explaining it. And what's so interesting, I believe this is the only time there's two lists of the Ten Commandments, and in both lists you get almost word for word the same, but with the Sabbath you have completely different reasons to obey it. So in the Exodus account, you're told to keep it holy because God rested on the seventh day. He says, if you think you're busy, God rested on the seventh. If you think your job really matters and you have a lot of responsibilities, you don't have as many responsibilities as God. And if God can take a day off, so can you. If you think you have a lot of kids, God has a lot more children to look out for. And if he's going to rest, so should you. But in Deuteronomy, it gives a completely different reason why we should rest and keep the Sabbath. In Deuteronomy, we're told that we are to take the day off because you were slaves in Egypt. Which is really interesting because this is the generation that wasn't slaves. It was sort of like a reminder, you come from a people of slaves. Now, what does a Sabbath have to do with slavery? Well, as slaves, they didn't get a day off. Egypt was an empire. And like every empire, it's built on the backs of the oppressed. And slaves aren't treated like human beings. They're treated like numbers on a spreadsheet, assets to make the rich more wealthy and comfortable. And so one reason we have to keep the Sabbath in Exodus is because this is how we follow God's example. Another reason is for us to show a resistance to oppressive empires. And, of course, in a few weeks, we're going to celebrate Juneteenth, the end of slavery in America, which is very valid and very important, but it was not the complete end of slavery in our world. In some ways, what we did is we shipped it out to other places of the world. I've mentioned outsourcing, and so many of our products and so much of what we buy today, we are able to afford because there are people on other parts of the planet working 12, 14-hour days, getting paid pennies on the dollar, and treated like slaves. And so it seems a little impossible for us to do anything to address this. Well, God gives us one small thing we can do, is we can take a day off. We can take a break from the grind. Maybe for you, for your Sabbath, you might say, I'm not going to go shopping one day a week. I'm not going to go out to a restaurant one day a week, just to be able to give someone else a break. Maybe, especially if it's on a Sunday, businesses, there's a few that will actually be closed on a Sunday for that reason. So we want to resist the force of that empire of constant movement, constant purchasing. We got to resist that in some way. And so the Sabbath is one way to resist it. And so God is offering a gift, Sabbath, to you. Are you going to take it? Are you going to take it? Let's talk about, in Hebrews, it says we got to work at it. Let us therefore make every effort to enter that rest. This is an interesting verse to me because you would think that rest should come naturally, but it's saying we need to work at rest. Recently, I'm preparing for this talk, and I'm like, you know what? I got to get better at my Sabbath. I take a day off on Friday, and sometimes I just waste it, like watching TikTok, watching Netflix and stuff, and I thought, that's not really resting to me. And so I tried it, and I'm kind of working on it. Maybe I try without my phone. I put it in a drawer for the day. I've heard of people who will have a special meal. They'll do from dinner to dinner. So like the night before starts your Sabbath, and you might have a special dinner. You invite a friend over or whatever. You light candles, you read a psalm, and you have a nice big feast. and you have lots of chocolate and ice cream afterward. Something really fun and memorable you look forward to. Maybe for you it would be closing your devices, no screen time for the whole day or for part of the day. Maybe for you, you're like, I'm going to do a nap every single day off. I need it. I'm going to love it. Maybe for you, it'd be fun to read or to have a conversation with a friend, or now that it's getting nice, go out for a walk, enjoy nature. It doesn't necessarily have to be something that you think of as like what comes to mind with worship, although worship would be pretty great too. Maybe your Sabbath is Sunday, and a part of your Sabbath ritual is going to church and worshiping God and being a part of a faith community. What would it look like for you to set aside a day to rest? Notice that the seventh day was the day that God rested. It wasn't the third or the fourth day. So our Sabbath isn't like a pit stop to get work done a little better. No, you weren't designed to be a human doing. You were designed to be a human being. And so the Sabbath is the culmination, is the climax, the pinnacle of your life, of your week. So enjoy it. Take the gift that God has given you. So often, Jesus said the Sabbath was made for man. God, week in and week out, says, I got something special for you. I got it all wrapped and nice, and He handed you this gift of Sabbath, of a break, of some time to delight and rest and stop working and to worship and to enjoy His presence, to sit with Him. He hands it to you. And week in and week out, what do? I take this gift and I shove it in the closet, along with all the other useless stuff I don't know what to do with. This week, let's not do that. This week, will you enjoy God's gift to you? Let's pray. Father God, I pray for lots of sleep. I pray for naps. I pray for some good meals. I pray for tacos and burritos out in a park. I pray for sleeping in. I pray for rejuvenating. God, would you help us to enjoy your rest? God, give us the strength and the work to rest. And God, I pray that as we practice it week in and week out, God, you would do something to our hearts where we would just be a little less on edge and irritated and anxious. God, that you would slow us down enough to enjoy our lives. Would you slow our hearts deep inside to experience true satisfaction in you? I pray that you would bless the people in this room with a true Sabbath this week. Amen. Amen.